This program is powered by thevirtual.show, making your offline events virtual. Ladies and gentlemen, the host of WEBIT Virtual, Dr. Plamen Russev.
It's a special week this week. We are talking about corporate responsibility. During the past 13 years of WEBIT, we've been discussing all about what, when, and how much we as corporate, as society, as a community are responsible for making this world a better place and, of course, creating the desirable future. Well, this week is a special week because we talk exactly about this. We're not going into the verticals that we usually cover, including fintech, mobility, health, etc. We go for the bigger good, for the greater good. We go for how the ecosystems, how the business and corporates are in position to basically impact the people's life for better. I would like to welcome all of you joining us for this edition of WEBIT Virtual and to announce that now is time to discuss with great leaders from the media world their point of view and their thoughts. We have a number of very interesting guests. Let me introduce them one by one. This is my first guest.
Nina Goswami is the BBC's creative diversity lead for the 50/50 project and news, and is spearheading initiatives to support the corporation's aspiration that its on-air representation reflects society. She oversees the multi-award-winning 50/50 project, which is currently the biggest collective action on increasing women's representation in BBC content there's ever been.
Welcome, Nina. Thank you so much for joining WEBIT Virtual.
Thanks for having me.
And I would like to introduce my next guest in the studio.
Rhett is a weekly columnist for Forbes and Inc. magazine. He is CEO of Power Coaching and Consulting and hosts Power Punch Live, one of the most popular business talk shows on LinkedIn's new live platform. Rhett was recently named the 2018 Best Small Business Coach in the US.
Rhett, thank you so much for joining us back to WEBIT Virtual. Welcome.
Oh, it is an absolute pleasure to be with you today. I'm excited to be here. I think this is going to be a great conversation.
We always have fantastic discussions with you, and I'm absolutely grateful for the invaluable contribution that you make to our WEBIT community. Thank you so much for joining. Allow me to introduce our next guest.
Tarmo Virki is an experienced tech journalist at Reuters. He is also a publisher, editor, and published author. Apart from his writing for Reuters and after failing with his first startup, he is now working with his wife on Lahentaje, Estonian drinks maker which recycles Christmas trees for tonic water. He also built Co-Founder magazine, a startup magazine that is a print edition editorial of the startup scene in Europe.
Hello, Tarmo. Such a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you.
Thanks, Plamen, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to join you even remotely. It would be so much nicer to be in Valencia, right?
Well, we all have to learn to accept what we cannot change and to make sure we change for better what we can. So we are doing both now. We are trying to add value to the lives of this wonderful community that we are building for the past 13 years all around the world, the WEBIT community, and at the same time accepting the fact that we have to be virtual. But I wouldn't mind to come to Estonia and to enjoy the wonderful people and the great experiences that your wonderful country is providing every time I join. Let's jump all of us, the three of us, into the studio and start our discussion on corporate responsibility. My first question is for Nina, of course, our lady, who is also responsible for diversity. We were supposed to have a second lady here from BBC, but she couldn't join because of technical challenges today. But Nina, you're representing a company which is one of the world's leading media companies. At the same time, of course, as many of companies in the world, you have employees and your teams working, having to work from home for unforeseeable future. How do you deal with this? How to make sure that there aren't groups adversely affected, and what is the secret sauce of making the next step ahead?
Oh, secret sauce. I think we all need that, don't we? So, I mean, when we went into lockdown in the UK was kind of mid-March time, and so for us as a media organisation, we had to move to what we call critical services. So we saw a lot of productions closing down, and a lot of resource moving into more kind of live news territory. We had massive audiences in that space at the time. So what you're seeing is this kind of move towards kind of supporting those particular broadcasts, but also at the same time we're having to keep our online side going as well. And so that's where kind of work from home played a really big part for us. One of the struggles that we had to start with was how do we equip so many staff members when they're working out of the office? Because we obviously, like many offices, would be very desktop based. So kind of that problem that a lot of people had about trying to get hold of those laptops and the tech side of things was a big issue to start with, but it was a credit to the tech teams how quickly they managed to get people into remote working. And what we find now is that in our particular newsroom, for example, we're trying to keep the numbers less than 15% at the moment. Obviously, as we ease up lockdown, that's going to increase, but that was the target that had been set. So a lot of the editing, a lot of that side of things had to be remote. And so the logistics were quite complex, as you probably know from making this show. So that was a real interesting game changer for us. But the other thing was the fact that the way that we communicate with each other as staff and workers totally changed. Being on Zoom continuously instead of being able to just shout across a newsroom or across your desk changes the dynamics within a team. So how do you ensure that everyone is heard? And I think that's kind of what you're alluding to in terms of the secret sauce. And that's really changed our workflow. I'd be interested to hear what Tarmo and Rhett have experienced in this space. But we've definitely found that our kind of calendar meeting diaries are the thing that are driving conversation a lot more than other things at the moment. But we are kind of running training sessions to try and help people with that work-life balance, because people now aren't necessarily working the normal hours that they would have 9 to 5 if you're an office worker, because you're having to look after a child at home and actually school them. So how do you flex your work life around that? And so that's been a really interesting challenge too.
Indeed, and I will say that we have to find and define the way. This will continue to be our main challenge in this uncertain time. Most probably, we really need to adapt to these new rules of being together, working together, making things together, whatever it is. What do you think, Tarmo? What is the Scandinavian take on that? We are aware of the 5 meter distance rule and the 2 meter. And if I have to repeat the joke we've discussed several times before this show, it is the 2 and the 5 meters that is the difference between Europe and Scandinavia. We have 2 meters by protocol WHO, but 5 meter by the life protocol of the Scandinavians that they talk to each other. So what do you expect to be the impact?
I mean, as a news reporter, I'm really in the outskirts of the world, working remotely since I don't know, for the last 10 years. So for me personally, the impact is really, really limited. I mean, maybe news conferences don't happen or something like that, or they happened over the Zoom at least at some point. But from the actual work ethics or the work logic point, you mentioned, Nina, when basically there is no newsroom to shout across. When you try to shout across the Zoom meeting, it will have a kind of massive change on the human behavior, because shouting across Zoom meeting feels totally different than shouting across newsroom. I mean, people will take it completely differently. They will be offended, and all these kind of things, which in normal newsroom, people will notice, only get the attention through shouting. So I think it will have, as you said, Plamen, it will have actually much deeper changes into the society.
And I know that, and we have been discussing this before, that at the end of the day, we will see some major changes. And those changes will come with a number of different approach and different solutions. You mentioned something to our team called smaller life. What do you mean?
Me? Smaller life? The smaller life, I don't know what I meant. I mean, basically...
Well, we were discussing that you have to travel less. You will work less, most probably. You will be having less opportunities to achieve bigger dreams, as big as you can travel 200-300 days per year, as I used to be. I used to be traveling all around the world 200 days per year. Now I'm not, obviously. So do you think that people will react to the current situation in a way that they work in a different way, they live in a different way, and this will create smaller bubbles and will create different type of communities and societies?
Absolutely. I think that I totally kind of agree with you with the logic that we will be working in the smaller societies. I think there will be less and less people like Plamen who are flying 200 days a year around the world. I mean, I kind of feel, I don't know, I think some people probably would feel sorry for you even if you would be flying 200 days a year around the world. I think we saw already before the corona the the beginning of people moving to work remotely. We saw the kind of location independent work, location independent and life even becoming some kind of reality. I think the corona has been a massive accelerator for these processes.
Rhett, what do you think is would be the outcome at the end of the day of this current situation where people, for the past 3, 4, 5 months already, depending on where in the world they are working from home, accustomed to new reality? Where do you see the next trend? Do you think that people will flee back to offices if possible? And what will be, how are we going to welcome people who've been going through COVID? What will be the acceptance levels? What is your take on that?
I think we're in for a sea change in the way we work. I was speaking to a CEO the other day of a major charity, a $500 million charity, and they have a nice place, a nice big office in the heart of New York City. And he said, you know what, we're getting rid of the office, we're getting rid of the building, we're going to downsize to a much smaller location so that if people want to come into the office to have a meeting, they can, but we're going to set them up in home offices wherever they want to work. So I do think that we're going to see more. I mean, for example, this is a prime example. My teenage son has his first job this summer. It's a remote job. He is sitting at my kitchen table right now on his laptop. That is in no way, shape, or form the way I worked when I was a teenager. So I think that we are in for just a complete change of the way we work. Now we're going to go back to offices. There's no doubt, and we have to in some ways. And a lot of us crave going into the office and having that water cooler conversation or having that lunch with a colleague. And I don't think we're going to get rid of that. But I do think a lot more flexibility is going to be in order. I think, we were Nina and I were talking about before we came on about things aren't going to change until we have a vaccine, and people aren't going to be comfortable. And I think as leaders and as CEOs and business leaders deal with the people coming back to work, we're going to have to deal with the anxiety that's going to bring. We're going to have to deal with the stress that's going to bring. And we also have to deal with the reality, my kids may not go back to school in the fall. So we're going to have to be more flexible as leaders with our teams, because their reality at home and their reality in their life isn't the same as it was a few months ago. So I think we're in for a lot of changes. I don't know what the crystal ball says. I don't know that I can predict it, but I think that there is change. And I don't think that we're going to go back to 100% back to the way it was 3 or 4 months ago.
I can't agree more with you, Rhett. And Nina, what are the innovations and what kind of innovations have come out of
one of the things actually is the technology barrier removal of the technology barrier has been a brilliant thing for us from a kind of a content making perspective. So one of the things that I lead is a project called the 50/50 Project, which is about increasing representation of women on our content as the media, but we also look at communications across the board. So we have 68 other partners now using 50/50 in their own communications. And the point of this is that to get new voices into our content, into our industry, we were looking for those new expert voices from who are women. And we were finding a barrier. We were finding that we couldn't get them necessarily to be coming into our studios, or they didn't have an ISDN line, so it wasn't good enough quality for the particular program that they were looking at being on. So innovation, the use of spaces like what we're using at the moment for this broadcast, and that virtual space has allowed us to find new people, new voices, new expertise that we wouldn't have had access to before. And that for me is a really exciting thing to have actually come out of COVID, because we're finding so many new voices because that barrier is being removed. So that's a really big step forward for us.
Thank you, Nina. Tarmo and Rhett, for both of you. We see that the changes are there to stay, and there is no doubt. There were some voices at the very beginning that it will be just temporary, it will be this, it will be that, nothing like this. What is your take on how the business is reacting? We see the layoffs, we see all the challenges that are out there. What is the situation in Estonia and the Nordics from your point of view, Tarmo?
I mean, I've been looking mostly for the Estonian and Finnish news flow, and what other companies are doing in the countries here. Finland has a weird system where people are allowed to be temporarily laid off to be rehired on the same terms later, which has worked really well for a number of big companies where they can, shift 1,000 people from the workforce for 2 months aside. The society will take care of them, and in 2 months, when maybe the worst of the crisis is over, rehire them on the same terms. In Estonia, I think the kind of governmental measures have played quite a big impact, where the smaller companies and bigger companies, which have been hit the most, have been quite generously even supported. So we've seen a lot of small innovation, maybe on the product side, on the delivery side, on the things like that, like everywhere else. But on general, if you look at the whole economy, those kind of the big support measures probably have helped in both countries over the worst of the crisis.
I was reading this report from McKinsey the other day that this sort of shocked me. And it said that most businesses are deprioritizing innovation and concentrating on their core businesses. And I find that fascinating. And in fact, the study also said that 90% of executives and leaders think that the COVID crisis is going to fundamentally change the way they do business over the next 5 years. And I find that really fascinating. I'm seeing a lot in my companies that I work with, which are usually small to medium-sized enterprises. I'm seeing a lot of innovation now, and I mean, and this is getting really granular, but I'm working with a bakery, and the bakery has now gone from a local business to a national business because they're shipping their product all over the country, and they made an immediate shift to online, and they figured out that they could use their reputation to grow their business with people around the country, and they've done a remarkable job to do it. I also work with a pet care chain. It's a place where people bring their pets, and it's a very interesting concept. But when they closed their stores, they had to completely go online and reshift their business in the way that they thought about their business to an online business. And now they're shipping all over the country too. So you've seen companies really innovate and rethink their whole business strategy and do it really quickly. And that to me is really encouraging. I think it's harder for a lot of big businesses to make that sort of big shift, but I've seen a lot of the smaller and medium-sized companies that I work with really make big shifts in their business and do it successfully.
Nina, my next question is for you. We see the change of society and business behavior. We are hosting this week Philips and some other global corporates with their strategies, which they showcase and they change and adapt to the minute. But what would you say in case of we have some challenges in terms of representation? Do we see in the corporate world, some changes in the general status quo that we had? I'm not speaking now for the movements that we see in US and that are really very challenging, but I'm speaking more about the gender equality and the way it works.
So I mean, in terms of from a workforce perspective, obviously there's still the really big kind of push that we're looking for is how do we get kind of more women into those kind of leadership roles? How do we diversify that top layer out of leadership, essentially? Because that's where we're looking for that diversity of voice. Because as we all know, that what happens at the leadership level trickles down to the rest of the organization, and it adds that diversity of thought that helps with that innovation that we're looking for. So one of the things that we do from our perspective is that we're trying to look to help support corporate organizations so that when they're having their external face, that they're representing and reflecting their organization to the outside world better. And by doing that, say, for example, I was talking to one health care provider earlier on today, and they said that 78% of their workforce were women. It just happens that their top echelons are men. And I said, well, you know, what's your public face? What's your image that you're providing? And their response was, well, it's always our chief executive who goes in front of the camera. And I said, well, if that's not reflective of your organization, how are you going to attract that new talent and that new workforce into those higher levels so that you can get that diversity of thought that you're looking for? And there's that kind of like switch moment of, oh, right, okay, maybe we should be looking at other expertise to be putting forward for media purposes and communications. So it's that kind of thing that I'm really interested in.
It is, the challenges are on so many levels. From one side, we see the diverse opportunity that is out there. I believe in the abundance of opportunities, especially in times of crisis. We should try to find our ways. And this is one of the best tools for innovation, obviously, are the startups. What is the state of startups in the Nordics, particularly in your country, Tarmo?
I think the startup scene was probably one of the as they always are, one of the fastest moving parts of the economy, right? There are few big developments. One I could see was that a number of them started to raise capital, which sounds quite weird from the logic that, you know, people were saying how there was no more money available and everybody was closing down the investments. A lot of Estonian kind of bigger startups have raised reasonable funding rounds during the COVID crisis. And if you think Estonia, it's not that big a country. It's 1.3 million people. It kind of punches well above its weight in the startup world, but still it's not that big. We have had a wide number of the funding rounds. And from the other side, Estonian startup community got together and started to organize global hackathons. So, a bit like this program, taking something which used to be physical, people were coming together for the weekend to hack together. Now they moved it all online and grew in scale. It wasn't happening, Tallinn suburb or the university building anymore. It was happening online. And maybe, one of the big ones they organized was in India. So it was a kind of Estonian startup community organizing an Indian hackathon, which sounds, weird enough, right? But with a new kind of world opening up, it has been growing really, really fast. And I think now one of the big global TV channels is actually making a movie about that hackathon.
And from Estonia to US, Rhett, many companies are prioritizing now to concentrate on the current effect on surviving and kind of forgetting about the constant innovation that we were accustomed to see during the past many years. Do you find this kind of a trend, and do you think it's good for the business?
I do find it a threat. I look at if you go back to the ancient times in 2008, and I guess not so long ago, you look at what came out of that. You look at Uber, you look at Airbnb, you look at some of the innovative companies that came out of that financial crisis. I think it is a mistake as a business to retract and to concentrate just on your core business and stop deprioritizing innovation. I do find that I do think that is a mistake. I learned in my own business in 2008, we grew 1,200% during that recession. And the reason we did that is because we went out and we reprioritized what we were doing. We looked at our customers and what they needed, and we shifted our whole business, and that helped us just explode, and our growth just exploded. And so I think it is wise in times like this and in times when things are changing to really look at yourself, look at your processes, look at your products, look at your services, and make sure that and look at what your customer needs and see how those things are changing, and not just, as I was talking about, the companies before, the bakery and the pet care company, they have shifted their whole business model to understand that we're in different times and that people are going to shop in different ways. People are going to look for products and services in different ways. And I think that that's what companies should be doing.
And again, back to the next steps and where the corporates will have to go. Now we see many people who already stated, and we were discussing to a number of businesses who say, well, most probably I will deprioritize my travel. Most probably I will do more things for my health. I will spend more time with my family. If this continues, we are entering in a completely new era where corporate governance will have to adapt to these new expectations of their own employees. And this whole thing changed for 3 to 4 months. Where do you think we're going, Nina?
I think you're absolutely spot on in terms of kind of when we're looking at the corporate governance space. That Tarmo kind of touched on it beforehand. We were already kind of moving in this direction, because as we were starting to increase remote working already, we were already seeing that we were having to provide a more flexible workforce environment for our staff. And especially, I suppose, in the media world, we're 24-hour organizations who have had to kind of adapt and change to that type of working previously. And maybe that's something we can help translate over to the corporate spaces as well. That idea that, 9 to 5, as we call it in the UK, isn't really going to cut it. The more global we become with our bakeries and so on, the more that we're going to be working 24 hours cycles. So the governance needs to follow that trajectory as well.
Absolutely. And what is your take on that, Tarmo?
Yeah, I mean, I think the governance in general, and of course the big bad abbreviation of HR, right? I mean, working in the big corporations, I always wondered what are the HR departments of the global companies are really doing, and how much of them are actually kind of needed in their old job, because the world has kind of passed on.
Yeah, I mean that's the leadership. I mean, I think leadership is expected now to understand this changed environment, and I think your people, if you're not taking these things into consideration and the changes that are going on in society, whether it be COVID related, whether it be social and racial injustice issues, if you're not addressing those and you're addressing those in a real meaningful way, where your teams know that you're serious and that you're not just giving it lip service, I think that's the imperative now. I think that's the expectation, and if you're not doing that, then I think you're setting yourself up for some real issues and real challenges, because people have more stress and more anxiety about what's going on in society, and if you're not creating a safe place to work, I think you're setting yourself up for some trouble.
So that's really where a lot of discussions happening in our space as well, definitely. Because one of the things that you've seen from COVID is the fact that there are dividing lines, very clear, obvious ones. So how do we change the conversation and the dialogue to make sure that that is more inclusive, that we're creating workforces and cultures that bring everyone together, that we're making sure that we're all accounted for, we all have a voice, and that really definitely does come from leadership, and that listening, I think, is really, really crucial at that point too.
Yeah, it's definitely a skill that leaders, if you weren't a listener and if you weren't thinking that way before, it's definitely a skill you need to have right now, no doubt.
We see the events industry because we are in it, and from running one of the world's technology innovation events in person once per year. Now we do 3 to 4 events per week with such great discussions. But there were some participants on the market who had some confidence, I don't know where it's coming from, to announce in-person events in September, in October, in November. Everything started because of the human safety, isn't it? I mean, the profits and the warnings and the announcements of the social distancing and etc. etc. Actually, the whole economy restructured and was put on a lockdown because of the concerns about the safety of the people. So if things doesn't change and everything continues the same way for the next 1 year, that if we continue doing what we do for the sake of the people's safety, then we will see that there might be some people who do not want to feel safe. We already see a lot of people in Europe, other places in the world, who are going out, proving there is no virus, we want to go back, we want to get into the corporate life, we want to go back in our everyday routines. This is what happened in Germany, basically. And now the cases go up again. So if we see this coming again and again and again, how do you imagine the future of a workplace? Is it 100% distant? Is it everyone working in small micro offices? What is your take on that?
We will have cubicles
Nina?
again, right?
Well, back to cubicles. I think that's a great idea. I love a cubicle.
The cubics.
Yeah. Well, back in the 80s and 90s, you used to have the old cubicle divides, didn't you? And then you just work directly on your own work.
Now we'll have a dome on top. A dome on top.
You could be literally in your own bubble. No, I mean, I suppose, the way that, we want to be in office spaces. The reason we want to be in office spaces is because we are humans and we like human interaction. And, part of well-being is being around others, essentially. We need that social connection, don't we? So I think that's something that will have to happen. One idea that people have been playing around with is that kind of blue team, red team. So you take your turns in being in spaces, so that if someone kind of falls ill within one particular team, that's just one team out. So we're playing around with different ideas like that. But as I think the only real solution is a vaccine that means that we can go back to some form of new normal. We'll never go back to where we were, mainly because, economically, innovatively, we've learned so much in the lockdown period that it has created opportunity that, it would be silly not to take hold of. But I think, we do need to move back to some form of normality at some point.
I think in general,
I predict we're gonna have some Zoom syndromes. You're gonna have some conditions that are caused by being on Zoom 8 hours a day. That's
absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow.
They say it's more tiring to be in a Zoom meeting, isn't it? Because you can see yourself at the same time as the other person, and the fatigue that you get from that. It's a genuine thing, apparently.
I think so.
just wanted to say that I think in general we will see more diversity. It will not be that everybody wants to get back to the workplace. I think there will be workplaces and jobs and the functions where people have to go back to the workplace at some point, and they need to go back. But the people working in remotely, working from a distance, working on whatever location, I think that trend will at the same time kind of get a really massive boost from this time. So I think we will see, the new normal will not be that people will go back to the office. The new normal will be that some people will go back to the office, some people will go and live on the island in the Baltic Sea and be actually happy about it.
I mean, that's
I think that's encouraging too, right? Because it gives you an opportunity to be a more global organization and actually have more diversity on your team. When I can hire someone in India, or I can hire somebody in Europe, or I can hire somebody in Asia to do work for my company, and we're accustomed to working remotely, I think that's encouraging. I think it's an amazing trend.
Yeah, and it definitely will open up the doors also for people with accessibility requirements, because this obviously means that there's a more flexible way of working. If you are the main carer at home, again, this helps with that, because you're removing that need to be away from the home space. And that's really exciting to see how many new members we can find for our workforces.
But it's very much connected to the amount of time you have with your family and taking care of your kids. Now, it's very important to see how next student year will look like. I've already hear from US rumors that there will be 20 to 30% of the whole studying being thought of like being at school, and then the other 70% distant learning. If that's the case, this means that parents cannot go to work anyway. So that's again part of the corporate culture and corporate responsibility. So on one side, you have your employees being incapable, impossible to be in school in your office because their kids are not at school.
Yeah,
it's so much to change.
Yeah, well, we found that in our team. We have one particular mum who the way that they've worked out their timing is that she'll work for our team morning until lunchtime, and then her husband takes over with the childcare for the rest of the time, so that they're kind of splitting their time that way, and that's working, and she's managing to do her normal amount of output at the same time as looking after her children. Her French has improved as well, apparently, so that's also helpful for her from the schooling perspective.
Right. I mean, that's the flexibility of having like those non-traditional work hours, and your company and BBC saying that's okay. We're going to adapt to the new reality. I think that's going to be the hallmark of this, right? Is that companies learn to be more flexible.
I'm a confirmed believer that it's only the adaptable that survive, and it's the humankind that survives, obviously, for the past many tens of thousands of years. So I'm looking forward to very quick and very dynamic solutions in regards of team working, in regards of building the new models of collaboration. Obviously, I look forward to this to be more virtual than in person, fortunately or unfortunately. And obviously, we will see these big changes happening now. I already know a number of startups who are either building new models or pivoting their previous models in regards to adapt to this new reality and give more tools for distant collaboration. And we will see it most in a very, very, very near future. Already I've following some of the news. The biggest winners when it comes to economy are Amazon, Microsoft, and some other companies providing collaborative working solutions. So the question for me is my last question for you, because time is it's already pressing us, and we have to wrap up. My final question for you would be, where and how do you see the most corporate responsible company? Where do you see this company going to in regards to, of course, the employees, and in regards to protecting our planet Earth? Because COVID just replaced the discussion. We were just started focusing on the real things that matter, on protecting planet Earth that we are definitely destroying with our work. And now we actually need to do something with a higher priority. Save families, save people's lives, which is the immediate challenge in front of us. So how do you imagine the corporate culture change in the next 1 year, 2 years? And this, of course, involves the corporate responsibility policies. Nina?
I mean, one of the unintended consequences of COVID going into a global lockdown is that obviously it's had an impact for Mother Nature, in the sense of we have seen a reduction in those kind of on the impact of climate change over that period, which is really interesting. So that kind of work from home culture will help continue that work. You know, the less cars that are on the road, obviously, and the less people who are traveling. The impact from that perspective is obviously clear to see already. So it will be a question, I think, for some corporate organizations to think about, you know, how do they continue to sustain that. We have a thing that we use called Albert for content making, which is about how do we offset our kind of carbon that we use when we're making productions. So we have those kind of facilities available. So that would be quite an interesting thing to see how that translates to other organizations. But I really do think that things like flexible learning are things that can benefit your organization in terms of innovation, but at the same time, as you say, try and address really big issues like saving the planet. If you don't have a rush hour, you're creating less carbon issue for the country. So I'm a little bit obsessed with this myself, because I have with my journalist hat on, it's something that I'm very interested in. So, but you know, so that was an idea that we were talking about just before lockdown, is how do we stagger work patterns so that we can become more carbon efficient. And so that is something that we can learn from and that we can move forward with as well. I mean, I'm really sad to see that COP is not going ahead at the end of the year in the format of it being in Glasgow, and that we were going to use that as a moment to see the next steps on the roadmap for change in this space. But, you know, in the UK government perspective, they're still saying that they're committed to the targets that they've set. And I think that, you know, we use that innovation that we've learned through COVID, because it has had this consequence of reset, essentially, in terms of environment and in some spaces, that we use that as an opportunity to bounce from that and see what we can take forward.
Thank you so much, Nina. Tarmo, what is your take on that?
I think the biggest change is between the small company and big company. You're talking about how Rhett was talking about how the leaders need to be, you know, more listeners and more closer to the staff in the current world. I mean, in a smaller company in general, that kind of comes by nature. You're small enough to speak with everybody on your staff on a regular basis and so on. While in the bigger, you know, dinosaurs with massive structures and so on, the corona, the COVID crisis will be in a way, deeper challenge to. It will be a bigger challenge for them to survive through the depending on the sector, deep downturn or the slower fall or the bump on a road. But I think in general it will create a lot of opportunities for smaller, more nimble companies, and it will create a lot of challenges for the dinosaurs.
You're an optimist, I would say.
I am, of course.
Because so far we see the big companies winning bigger.
I'm still an optimist. Hey, I'm a journalist. I have to be an optimist, right?
Sorry, I didn't hear you. What did you say?
I was saying that as a journalist, I have to be an optimist, right? The world eventually will be a better place, right?
I wish more journalists are optimists like you. This is what I was going to say. So, because at the end of the day, perception is reality, isn't it? And we see this. I'm paranoid myself, so I appreciate your positivism. But still, we see the reality, and the reality is that the big companies, the big corporates, are those with deep pockets, with ability to withstand the winds, and obviously to adapt to the new changing realities. I know businesses which had to lay off 10,000 people in one day. Dramatic. It's terrible.
I think many of us know those businesses. I think that the key word you said there was adaptation. I think by nature, smaller companies are more able to adapt than the big companies. I think the good example was I was speaking with some web shop developers probably in April, and the point they were making was that the big companies are stopping their projects because those are the innovation projects they can kind of kill, while small companies are putting all their money in the web shops, trying to build actually a business. I think it was kind of showing the difference between the two worlds quite nicely, like putting the mirror in front of them. I mean, yes, I know that the Amazon share price has rocketed again and so on, but looking from the ground up, I think we are seeing also kind of bigger changes inside the economies.
Thank you so much, Tarmo. Rhett, I leave it up to you to wrap up this discussion, having your point of view and being the one with the most experience. What is your take on the future corporate responsibility strategies?
I think what's happening in society is fascinating. I mean, as a political scientist in my early life, and as a historian coming out of university, I find the social injustice and racial stuff that's going on around the world, and which started in the United States a few weeks ago, COVID, another fascinating sort of sociological sort of a look at what's happening. And I think it's forcing companies to come to the realization that they have to deal with these issues. And society's changing in other ways where we have more information about companies' behavior. We have more information about CEO and leadership behavior. And I know in my own personal habits that I make buying decisions. I refuse to go to a place where I disagree with something the CEO has said or done, or the company has said or done. And so we're now making informative decisions, buying decisions on products and services based on the company and the be responsible players in their community and responsible in what they do. So I think that's a great thing that's happening. I think that's a great change that's forcing companies to do the right thing. I think that's a good thing.
I would like to thank all of you for taking part in this discussion. In regards of technology, it was challenging, but in terms of the topic, it's even more challenging because it sets obviously new trends And we see that it is just the beginning. Let's see where this will take us. Next week, we are going to be discussing geopolitics based on the challenges that we see. We shall be hosting in our virtual studio people who are changing and shaping the current world. Some of those have already changed it big time, like the father of internet, Vint Cerf, who is going to be with us on Tuesday. And further, along with him, we are having people from the Atlantic Council, the director of the Geotech Center. We shall be hosting the US Department of Homeland Security. We are having the Singularity University chair. So it's going to be a fantastic discussion on geopolitics based on the COVID challenges that we are seeing. So from corporate responsibility to a government decision-making process, I think it's that small, thin red line that will show us actually at the end of the day where we are heading to. I'm very grateful to all of you, the panelists of this discussion today, and I look forward to welcome you back to the WEBIT Virtual Studio. Thank you all, wonderful WEBIT community from all around the world, for being with us. And I would like to invite you back the same time next week with the Thought Leadership Summit and with the Leading Media Forum on Geopolitics. Thank you so much.
This program is powered by thevirtual.show, making your offline events virtual.